Welcome to A Taste of AZ podcast, where we interview everyone from James Beard award-winning chefs to local mixologists, winemakers, breweries, and so much more. We've got an awesome episode lined up for you today. But before we get into that, head to atasteofaz.com so you can subscribe to our quarterly magazine and email newsletter to find all of the best places to eat and drink around town. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Now let's get into the episode. Hello, A Taste of AZ podcast listeners. We are back today at Bar Bambino at Elefante, but during our last visit, I interviewed your colleague, Phil, executive chef, I believe is his title.
Executive chef.
Yep, and he oversees, the food over here, I believe, but mainly Elefante is kind of where he spends most of his time, whereas
Definitely.
I understand it that this place is kind of your brainchild in a way and kind of your playground. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. This is our sort of concept within the concept, a little escape from the restaurant atmosphere, a little more of a cocktail lounge where it's a great place for a date night where you have nice music and dim lighting, and it's a lot more about the drinks. Mm-hmm. We still do serve food in here, but it's a little bit more French bistro style. Currently a bit more leaning towards snacks. You can get an amazing burger and a couple other items that'll actually fill you up, but for the most part, it's lighter fare right now.
And I'll have you go ahead and introduce yourself as well. And of course, I mentioned we're at Bar Bambino, but who are you and how do you fit in here?
Of course, I'm Julien Calella. I'm the VP of beverage for Wish You Were Here group that operates Elefante and Bar Bambino. So I'm actually based out of California, but I do all the beverage programs for the group. So California, New York, here, also our Vegas properties, and I kind of just create all the drinks.
Nice. Yeah, and so I've dined at Elefante multiple times since the interview with Chef, and I've been blown away every time. And I've not been in here when it's live and rocking and rolling yet, but it totally feels different. I mean, the space, although there are some similar kind of motifs and the color palette is somewhat similar and kind of that natural component of the design, that side has the big kind of open wall, very much an open space, whereas this feels a lot more intimate. So it stands out in a unique way for sure. But if you could kind of describe and give the rundown of, since you're part of overseeing the whole group, how does this concept fit into the group and where are some other places you spend your time?
Definitely. This is actually very different from anything else we've done. This is, as you said, more of a speakeasy, like a little darker, a little more dimly lit, a little sexier atmosphere. And when we first came to Arizona, we noticed a lot of the places that you would go after dinner are more of a nightclub. And it's that really intense scene where it's bottle service and it's loud.
Sure.
And there's obviously a place for that, but this is something that's a different offering for that after dinner experience where it's a little bit calmer, a little more elevated. And then, of course, later on in the evening, the lights get even dimmer, the disco ball goes on, we have dancers that are in here, we have a DJ that comes on, and it turns into more of a party, but it's not that intense nightclub atmosphere, and the music leans a little more towards disco, etc. Most of the other concepts that we have are much more restaurants, like Elefante being one of them, of course. We have a location in Venice called Bell's Beach House that's like a Japanese Hawaiian tiki bar that turns also into a party later in the evenings, but much more open space. And I guess in general, most of our concepts are a lot airier and lighter and places that you would maybe see fitting next to a beach.
Sure.
And then our concepts in New York, the Little Ruby's Cafe being the first one, is an Australian cafe that you'd probably find somewhere near Bondi Beach.
Okay.
And a little more casual, great coffee, delicious food, but not as much leaning on the cocktail scene as we do at the other locations. But yeah, everything else is very much food driven, where this concept is all about the alcohol and the drinks.
Sure. Well, and obviously that's kind of your purview as well as the alcohol and the drinks. So how, as far as the actual drinks being served, is this spot differentiated from your other locations?
So being that the other locations are more restaurants and they are very busy all the time, and they're also open air and beachy, the cocktails are a little bit more in that style. So Bell's, the tiki, they're all tiki style cocktails on crushed ice and just very flavorful. And then in the restaurants, they're a bit more leaning towards fruity and refreshing flavors and just drinks that people could drink during the day and then lead into the evening with. And then you, of course, have your classic stirred cocktails that are a little stiffer. There's always something for everybody, but the theme goes more towards that. Where here, it's a little bit more about the presentation. The cocktails are a little bit more, serious drinks that you would drink in the evening. This isn't somewhere that you're going to sit and want to drink a Mai Tai or something like that. So Negroni style cocktails, a couple old fashioned style cocktails. The ones that are shaken with citrus are a little bit more dry, a little bit more just like cleaner cocktails.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm excited too because we're going to kind of sit and chat a little bit, get some of your background and hear more about the concept, but then you're going to whip up a few drinks and you're going to let me have a taste of them.
Oh, yeah.
So I like to think that I have somewhat of a refined palate. I've certainly had enough beverages at this point that I should be able to say that. But yeah, tell me a little bit about how you got into hospitality and I guess the cocktail making side of things as well.
Yeah, I actually worked in bars ever since I was 19 years old. My first bar job was in Amsterdam. So I'm half Dutch.
Oh,
my
really?
mother's from out there. And my first college experience was out in Amsterdam, and my job on the side while I was in college was at a crazy nightclub right in the center of the city.
Wow.
So obviously had quite a fun time doing that.
That's got to be very different culture-wise. Would you agree?
Different.
Okay.
Yeah, very different. The drinking culture is different. It's a lot of fun, of course. But the drinking age is a little lower there, so people can go out and drink beer and wine at 16, and then they can
really?
drink liquor at 18. So very busy, wild club. Different than what I do now. Of course, we're in restaurants. It's a little bit more of an elevated experience. We're selling kettle sodas and kettle Red Bull and like tons of beer on draft.
This is in Amsterdam.
This was in Amsterdam,
right?
yeah, tons of beer on draft. But I think the really valuable experience I gained from that was just working in volume, like knowing how to prioritize your time and really be able to handle crowds of people efficiently.
Sure.
And then when I came back to Los Angeles, I was only 20 still, so I wasn't immediately working in a bar. But right when I turned 21, I got a bar backing job at a place in San Francisco called Raven that was kind of a cocktail lounge with a little speakeasy in the back, but it had an upstairs level that was very much a club. So I got to hone in on craft cocktail making and just learn all about flavors, and was lucky to work with some really talented bartenders there that just taught me everything about spirit categories and liqueurs and mixers and vermouths, etc. And then we would make those kind of drinks, but then on the weekends when the upstairs opened, the whole place just turned into a madhouse. And so we would be still making those kind of cocktails, but then again with the volume. So I was able to start kind of pairing those two worlds. And then from there, I actually went to UCLA. I moved down to Los Angeles from San Francisco, where I grew up, and got a job at a place called the Tasting Kitchen, which was a very busy restaurant, but now more towards what I do now, where it was more about the food and really just very elevated restaurant concept. And we would make cocktails to match that with great quality ingredients, and had an amazing mentor there named Justin Pike, who was the bar manager. Learned a ton from him. And a few years later, right after I graduated, I was figuring out what I wanted to do, and happened to meet Nick and then Thomas and Rob, who are other partners in the company, just at the Tasting Kitchen one day. They came in. They were actually looking for someone to help them open the original Elefante, and we just got along really well. And
Nice.
here we are 6 years later.
So as far as your involvement in the group, was Elefante your first round of a restaurant working
Yes.
in, or kind of what was your involvement when you were brought on?
So I was brought on basically as the lead bartender to curate the menu.
At Elefante.
At Elefante in Santa Monica, correct.
Okay.
And to curate the menu there, and then got brought on in May. We opened in July. It was sort of late May. So I kind of put together the order for the tools and made sure the menu was ready to go, and opened the venue. And then as we've grown as a company, Elefante really kind of brought us to another level. Like, that place was instantly just so popular and put a lot of attention on us. And we started opening a lot more concepts from there. And we didn't really have a corporate beverage program at the time, and it was just working out really well at Elefante. And Nick gave me the opportunity to keep opening more venues with him. So I've just kind of, as we've grown into now the role of VP of Beverage, because we've gotten big enough where it makes sense to have an actual beverage department.
Sure.
So now there's people that work in each market that oversee the programs under me. And then of course there's managers and lead bartenders everywhere. But it really started from just, you're the lead bartender, let's make a menu, let's open this venue. And then we just kind of kept opening them from there. And the department grew as we grew.
So two words that have kind of resurfaced a couple of times is scale, more so on you discussing kind of your background, and then with tied to these concepts is elevated. To give listeners kind of an example of elevated, like I've mentioned that I've been here multiple times, and after our last podcast, Chef Phil kind of brought me through the kitchen real quick and showed me, and the handmade pastas, the self-serve machine for the pistachio sundae, which is amazing, the house fermented sourdough, all of those things are like what makes it elevated, right? But those kind of seem like they would oppose scale. And same thing on the cocktail side of things. I mean, you know, when you have a drink like your clarified Paloma, which you serve out of a keg, is my understanding, right? Yeah, that definitely works well for scale. But some of these more advanced cocktails, seem like they'd be really hard to make when you have a restaurant as big as Elefante out here. Is this Elefante your biggest concept that you guys have?
Currently, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, scale, as far as the size of the restaurant, it's the largest one we have. Santa Monica and this location actually are very similar as far as a business and how much revenue they do, just because Santa Monica has the beautiful view of the ocean, so we're always busy during the daytime over there. This is gigantic, but as we've grown, yes, it is difficult to make everything from scratch and do that at volume. But as long as you put systems in place and you have people to execute the different pieces of the system, it works. So for us, we do everything fresh for the beverage programs. Like all the juice is juiced fresh daily. All of the syrups that we make in-house, and we make with fresh fruits that we juice and then turn into syrups, or teas that we make with different herbs, or just all sorts of infusions with like basil going into a vermouth, or just everything is done in-house. We have a prep team that's dedicated solely to beverage prep. So I have
really? Wow.
2 or 3. Here I have 3 people often that are working, 7 days a week, that are they're coming, they're juicing, they're cutting the fresh garnishes, they're making all the syrups, they're batching the kegs. Like you said, the clarified Paloma, it seems like it'd be easy actually, but in order to clarify it, like we have to make the fresh grapefruit juice and then the fresh lime juice. Then we have to add a bunch of different enzymes to it to sort of separate the solids from the liquid. And then we use activated charcoal to strip the color.
Okay.
And then that all goes into what's called a spinzall, which is a little centrifuge that spins the liquid about the speed of a car engine. And then that separates the solids from the liquid. And then this grapefruit lime juice mixture now comes out perfectly clear and looking like water. So then that gets added to the little bit of sugar and the tequila, and then we batch that all into the keg, and then we have to attach it to a CO2 tank, and it carbonates overnight. So yeah, once it's on the keg line, it's great for volume, but that process to get there is quite a bit of work. But like I said, as long as we have the team in place, and then we have bar leads that count all the product daily, make sure everything's fresh, make sure that we're ordering all the product that we need, and we have the right amount of limes, so they're not going bad and we're not running out. And then the bar manager oversees all of them. And then typically if we're in a state or a market where there's multiple venues, then I'll have a beverage director in that market as well that oversees everybody's operation and makes sure that from the bottom up the numbers make sense and the product is done coming out correctly. So it's difficult, but it's also fun because it's a lot to set up, but then when it's working, it's like all the brainchild comes out and it's happening and it's running on its own, and it's beautiful to witness.
Well, yeah, and I just thought it was interesting because it seems like they found the right guy for the job with you, because you have that background, that foundation of the volume, and then slowly kind of built in the love of cocktails and developing your craft side of things. And yeah, being at Elefante, and I'm an early eater, so I'd come in around 5 p.m. and it's like so mellow in there at that time typically. But then by the time I'm done with dinner, there's not an open seat in the house, and there's espresso martinis going everywhere, and it's a totally different vibe. And so it's interesting to see how that kind of formulates. And yeah, as I mentioned, you seem like they found the right guy for the job. So yeah, we were talking a little bit about your journey with the group. You start out at Bar Bambino, or excuse me, you start
Elefante in Santa Monica.
Yeah, correct. So where do things go from there, and how does your role kind of expand?
Sure. So the next venue that we opened was called Cassie, and that was in West Hollywood. Sort of a Mediterranean concept, did similar style to Elefante, but smaller scale, a little bit more boutique, we did it a little more elevated actually, the food and the drink at that location, just because it was a little smaller and it was doable. That moved on to starting to open venues in Vegas. So we opened Cassie Beach House at the Virgin Hotel in Las Vegas, which is now somewhat similar to Elefante's concept, coastal Italian fare right on the swimming pool, beautiful atmosphere. Then we did a couple other projects in Vegas that we've since continued to expand in that market. And then New York, we have the Little Ruby's concept, which started off as more of just a cafe, and then non-alcoholic beverage and just minimal alcoholic beverage offerings. But the newer versions have bigger bars, and we're leaning a little more into the cocktails. So we opened one in West Village. That's an amazing property. We just opened one in Williamsburg. And then prior to that, we opened the Bell's Beach House concept in Venice. So it's really starting Santa Monica. We expanded a little bit in Los Angeles, then moving into Vegas. Then I sort of joined the company in New York. It was already existing, but I was more focused on the different concepts. And then a few years ago, we tacked on New York as well, started changing things up over there. We're redoing one of our concepts in the Lower East Side called Dudley's right now. So we're going to be changing that up, adding a few different food options, changing the drink menu over there as well. But basically it started with West Coast and then just changing and adapting and developing everything that was already existing. And then we've done all in about 10 openings together since I started with them.
Wow, that's awesome. And this place is massive. It is quite an experience, so congratulations on this. Do you have anything else in the mix right now that you guys are looking at for next concept?
We're currently working on Elefante Dallas.
Oh, okay.
So that should be coming quite soon.
Seems like Dallas is drawing in quite a bit of restaurant, food and beverage attention.
That's what I've heard. I'm actually quite unfamiliar with the market, so I'm going to be learning about it as the coming months come, but we've just been so busy here and everywhere else. And ownership, of course, is the ones leading the charge on the deals and making the new concepts happen. So as of right now, I still actually have never set foot in Texas, so I don't have a lot to comment on that.
Yeah, because we just did a podcast with the Rah Rah Room in downtown Phoenix, which is a major food group concept. And I don't like to compare, but it seems like there's some similarities with, like, they have their famous pasta and you guys have, I guess, a different version of kind of a similar dish, and they're all around the globe. And I think they have a spot in Dallas as well. So between you two groups, that's interesting that you both have landed out there. So as far as the menu here at Bar Bambino on the cocktail side of things, talk to me about why certain drinks are on there, how you've done things a little bit differently, and is there any standout drink or something that you personally love about the menu? Yeah,
definitely. So for the most part, it's slight riffs on classics, so things that are familiar and then just done our way. So the La Bambina cocktail, for example, is sort of a Moscow Mule style drink, but then with a little Italian vermouth and some pear. And then everything in this concept, Bar Bambino means, baby bar in Italian. So everything has a little bit of an Italian twist to it for the most part. So we did a version of a white Negroni where I infused oregano and bergamot into the vermouth, and which gives it some extra Italian flavors. Then there's a cocktail called The Last Word. That's a classic that's very popular, amazing drink with green chartreuse, maraschino liqueur, and then lime and gin. So I did a fun little riff on that. I personally love mezcal, and it works amazing with mezcal. So I did a mezcal riff on that. And then instead of green chartreuse, which is an alpine liqueur from France, I used Centum Herbis, which is a Italian liqueur from the Alps. So similar in style, but then the Italian version. Centum Herbis means 100 herbs in Latin. So it's got all these beautiful botanicals from the Alps that they've made this really amazing herbaceous liqueur with. And then I took that and made a foam with agar-agar, so it's a vegan foam, and then that and a little citrus, and then we top it so you kind of get that flavor first before the mezcal and the other flavors hit, and then a little bit of lime zest on top, which that one's probably my favorite. I'll definitely make that one for you.
Okay, cool.
And then we did a little riff on like a whiskey sour with Japanese whiskey and a little Cabernet float that's super tasty. And yeah, I mean, there's a ton of them on there. I'm very proud of this menu. It's fun.
Well, it's interesting for me because, like, with food, it feels somewhat intuitive. I can taste a certain flavor. I'm like, okay, I could replicate something like this, doing this. Whereas with cocktails, it is so beyond me. Like recently, I've been starting to make carajillos at home, and that's like a very simple cocktail. At its basic form, I think it's just espresso with the liquor 43. And then I've been, throwing in a little tequila for an extra punch and playing with the ratios a little bit to try and find the balance. And I'm still so far from like the best versions of that drink that I've had. Here being one of them where it almost tastes like tiramisu. I remember we were having a tiramisu and I was drinking one of those and I was like, this is insane, the crossover. And it's so delicious. And another one just that jumped out to me is the pina colada slushy. That one is dangerous because I took like one sip, and it's one of those drinks where you just want to keep going and taking more sips. You got to pace yourself a little bit. But I'm interested in how you not only build a menu that fits a certain place, but like when you're constructing recipes, how are you not only doing something different by finding these liqueurs or doing these infusions that are unique, but then also ending up with a cocktail that is just that delicious that people have a hard time not drinking it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so when it starts, there's obviously so many options on what to work with. So if there's no concept behind what we're making, or there's no direction, it's fun, but it can be a little daunting because you're like, where do I want to go, right? The nice thing is all of our venues have a specific country typically that the food is tied to. So for Elefante and Bar Bambino, it's Italy. So that narrows down my scope on mixers that I want to work with so that I stay a little bit more Italian. So then now I have vermouths and amaros, which there's a plethora of and have so much flavor and are so fun to play with. So then I'll start using those as the mixers. And then whenever I make a menu, I try to make sure that we have something for everybody. So all the different alcohol categories are represented. Then there's shaken and cocktails, stirred cocktails. Then we have a section of classic cocktails because there's always the drinker that just wants what's familiar, and we'll offer it and we'll do it the best way that we can for them. But you'll have, the shaken cocktail section will be something with vodka, gin, rum, tequila, mezcal, and bourbon. And then for my stirred cocktails section, which typically the stirred cocktail drinker knows what they want. They want the classic Manhattan, or they want a classic old fashioned, or they want a Negroni. And I'll do a couple versions of riffs off of that, but those aren't typically the most popular drinks on the menu. It's more for the bartenders or for that, real cocktail aficionado. So I'll do a couple of those, typically a Negroni variation, and then typically some sort of an old fashioned variation. And then we always have slushy machines. So we do those delicious slushies. I've done so many random ones with that, which are really fun to play with. And then we do a couple cocktails on draft. So here we have that clarified Paloma that you had mentioned, and then we do an Aperol Spritz and an elderflower Spritz. I like to do carbonated cocktails on draft. They just kind of come out a little bit more consistently. And then the espresso martini craze, which you also noted when you leave here after your dinner and you just see them on every table. They just are the most popular drink right now. It's just riding a wave. So I've decided at every venue to do a bit of like an espresso martini section on the menu. So we have the classic one, which you can choose to have vodka, tequila, or mezcal with. And then we do a few different flavors. So currently here we have lavender, which we make a house-made lavender syrup, and then add a little bit of almond orgeat, which gives beautiful texture. And then we have a cinnamon one, which is fun, sort of Carajillo style, because there is a little liquor 43 in there.
So do you not have a Carajillo? Was I confusing
You probably had
that?
that, yeah. If it was off the menu, then it was probably that one. So it's cinnamon syrup that we make in-house. We use a little liquor 43 and then just espresso and reposado tequila. So similar flavors.
That's what it was, definitely.
I love that one. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
And then we do a mocha espresso martini with an Italian coffee liqueur, and then creme de cacao, a chocolate liqueur, and then we do that with mezcal. It kind of works with everything, but I found it to be super tasty with mezcal. But that section is just, it makes everybody happy. There's something for everyone. Everyone wants their espresso martini.
Well, you do a flight of them as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
and then,
pretty neat.
yeah, people, if they want to try it all, there's an option to just choose all the flavors at once and get a flight, and you can pass them around the table. And then for the wine section, I have a wine director that works with me in the company. His name's John Marco, and he's got an amazing palate. And we kind of just work together to make sure the categories are represented properly for the by the glass. And then depending on the concept, we'll lean a little bit more here Italian, of course, but then there's a little bit of France represented everywhere. There's the California big reds that everybody likes to order. And then there's a little bit more niche products like from, Portugal, or, the islands around the south of France or Greece, etc. Just beautiful different options. And then for the beer, keep it minimal. We don't really sell as much beer. We sell mostly cocktails, actually. So there's always a couple options for beer on draft. But basically the goal is have something for everybody, and then within that, make it creative. So then now I have that vodka cocktail, right? And it's like, I always want to make it so if you look at that drink, you're like, oh, I recognize at least 3 or 4 of these ingredients, so I'm willing to try it. I've always found, if you have vodka and then there's green chartreuse and this sort of liqueur and then this vermouth and this Amaro in it, and people look at it and they're like, I don't know what 75% of that drink is, they're most likely not going to try it. So then it's, maybe it's vodka, lime, cucumber, and they're like, oh, I know I'm going to like those 3 flavors. And then there's Dolin Blanc vermouth, which I've never heard of Dolin Blanc vermouth, but I know I like vodka, lime, and cucumber, so I'll give it a shot, right? So every drink kind of has that, where there's a touch of familiarity, but then there's the few different additives that we put in that makes it our spin and makes it unique. Yeah.
Well, I'm in places like this a lot, and places being high quality cocktails that have some of those more advanced ingredients. So I totally agree with the fact that you were trying to go for that and make them approachable, but also kind of push people into new ingredients that they haven't tried before. Let's get a quick message in, and then we'll hop over to the bar, and you can kind of show me what you guys do here.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Let's do it.
A real quick reminder, head over to atasteofaz.com and subscribe to our email newsletter. Also, subscribe to A Taste of AZ magazine and get it shipped right to your door. Now let's get back into today's episode. Julien, well, we have made it over to the bar here, and this is the part that I was most excited for. So before we get started, give me kind of the rundown of what you're going to be whipping up here.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about a couple of the cocktails earlier. I'm going to start off with the El Finale, which is the riff on the last word cocktail.
Okay.
So our version has 400 Conejos Mezcal, fresh lime juice, maraschino liqueur from a brand called Lazzaroni. It's made in Italy. And then Centum Herbis, the herbaceous liqueur from the Alps in northern Italy. And then with that foam on top, little cherry garnish and a little lime zest. And then I'm going to do the riff on the whiskey sour drink. So Japanese whiskey, citrus, and then a foaming agent. So I like to not use egg whites as much as possible and use vegan foaming agents. And then a little float of Cabernet wine. So it's super tasty. And then that Negroni, the one that's a riff on a white Negroni that uses Roku Japanese gin, and then our vermouth that we infuse with the bergamot and oregano.
Wonderful. All right, well, let's get started.
All right, sweet. So we'll start off with the El Finale. Do a little bit of the freshly squeezed lime juice. And then the 400 Conejos Mezcal. And then I'm happy to give you all these recipes if you'd like. This one's actually quite easy. It's just equal parts of the 4 ingredients. So I do 3/4 ounce of each. And then because we get so busy, I batch the liqueurs together.
Okay, cool.
We'll go ahead and shake
because I've had the Lazzaroni, the Amaretto.
Great.
With coffee as like a nice little, like almost like an almond cookie coffee type deal.
Yeah, theirs is fantastic. Honestly, all their liqueurs are amazing.
Yeah, and so when you're making these riffs, or like with this one in specific, once you're finished shaking it, I'll have you kind of explain how this one is different than the original version of the recipe.
Of course. So the original is also equal parts, but then it's with gin, and then instead of the Centum Herbis, which is the Italian Alpine liqueur, it's with green chartreuse, which is a French Northern Alpine liqueur. So subtle differences, and then the original is served up in a coupe, and then while we're putting ours on the rocks and we're adding that foam that we make, when we make this foam with agar-agar and then the Centum Herbis and a little bit of lime. So you get this really beautiful decadent foam. And then you kind of sip that and you get the flavor of the Centum Herbis, prepares you for what's coming next. And then when you actually get to the cocktail, you have that fun mezcal pop and then that little maraschino flavor. And then this just gives you that bright lime zest, and it looks pretty. Yeah,
it looks beautiful. It's like simple, but also stunning at the same time, which is kind of what I love to see in cocktails.
Agreed.
And so this is the El Finale, correct?
El Finale, yes. Yeah, you gotta sip through that foam.
Wow. It's super punchy on the citrus, but on the front end, you definitely smell kind of the herbal component. And it's an interesting start to it. And it's super light. And so what is in the foam exactly?
The foam is agar-agar, which is vegan gelatin. Then the Centum Herbis liqueur, a little bit of sugar, and then a little bit of lime juice. And then that gets all cooked together. The agar-agar has to melt and sort of integrate with the other ingredients. And then if you let it cool for too long, then it turns into a solid and you got to start over. So then we put that all into the ISI canister once it's gotten to be about room temperature, or a little bit in between cold and room temperature, warm and room temperature. And then we just charge it with nitrogen and just shake it into the tin, and then it comes out that beautiful texture.
And so with the foam on top, that is not typically part of it, or it is, but it's egg whites?
Yeah, no, not at all. That's typically the cocktail's served in like a martini glass, and there's no foam, and it's just very clean and simple, just the 4 ingredients.
And so when did this, is this on any of your other menus, or was this specifically a Bar Bambino cocktail?
Everything here is specifically Bar Bambino, except if you look at the menu, we have the same espresso martinis that we have in the restaurant, just because they work and why not? They're delicious.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then for the draft cocktails, because we have the same draft system running through the whole building, I do still have the 2 spritzes and the Paloma. But other than that, the whole menu is just unique to this location.
And have you had a different version of like this drink in your repertoire in the past? Obviously there's the classic version of it. Has this been kind of stewing for a while, or did this only arise in your mind when this concept came about?
It really was just for this concept. I mean, a mezcal last word is something I've made quite a few times just because mezcal is delicious, and honestly, a lot of classic gin cocktails work very well with mezcal, just if you like that flavor profile. But actually, our bar manager here, Shai, kind of came up with doing the foam, and then was just excited about a mezcal last word. And then I thought it'd be fun to, then incorporate the Centum Arabis instead of the chartreuse and make it a bit more Italian. So it was actually her that kind of decided, hey, let's make a foam on top version of a last word. And then between the two of us, we landed on this recipe.
And so with the Centum Arabis, am I pronouncing that correctly? Yeah. And that's an Italian liqueur?
Yeah, exactly.
So like for me, when I look at a shelf, whether it's at Total Wine or a local retailer or really anywhere, and I see all the different liqueurs, I'm like, I have no idea what these are. I see a Clase Azul bottle, or like I'm more of a Don Fulano guy myself,
Agreed.
But I see those and I'm like, okay, I know what that is. How did you build up knowledge around these liqueurs? Is it, we have a recipe and we want to test out these? Or is it, over the years you've kind of accumulated a list of them in your mind that you're just waiting for a chance to pull them out?
It's definitely a combination. So over the years, there's just been ingredients that I've tasted that I think are delicious and that are very versatile, that can be just used with so many different other ingredients and just add either a touch of floral or a touch of bitter and citrus or just whatever it is that they bring to the drink that you wouldn't necessarily know that's what's in there, but it just adds another layer.
Sure.
So there's a few different liqueurs and vermouths that I typically bring to almost every different concept just because I love them and I know they work. But then whenever we do a new venue, I'll just talk to the distributors and be like, I want everything in your book that's Italian. Let's just have a tasting. And then they'll come by and bring suitcases full of bottles and we'll just sit there and taste liqueurs and vermouths and whatever it is for hours.
That's so interesting to me because if I have like a sip of, like I see the Lazzaroni over there, by itself, I'm like, this is disgusting. How do you ever work this into a drink? Is it like that for you where you can have that and you can kind of distill it down, or are there techniques that you use to kind of explore what it might taste like if it's mixed?
At this point, I think I just know because I've tasted so many different things that I kind of get an idea of like, this is the really intense version, but I know when it gets added to other elements, it's going to dilute down and these are the flavors that are going to stand out. And I'm going to like that in this, whatever drink I'm working on. But also I'll do things like put it over ice and try it, or just add a little bit of sparkling water and sip it. And then typically like the dilution, because it's a lot of sugar in a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
So when you take that sip, it's intense flavor and very sweet. So it's like, it's a little overwhelming.
Totally.
But when you dilute it down with the ice or the extra little bit of sparkling water, you can start to separate the flavors that are in there, and then you actually taste the pleasant parts of it instead of it just being so intense.
Yeah, well, for me, that's one of the things that as I, occasionally make drinks continues to evolve in my mind is how much of a difference dilution can make in being able to actually bring the flavors out, so it's not just all sugar or almond or whatever the liqueur may be. Is there any reason you chose this specific mezcal?
It's a soft mezcal. I didn't want it to be too overpowering. Mezcal is still a bit of a polarizing flavor for a lot of people that just, especially they've tried like a cheaper mezcal the first time they've ever had it. And like, I never want to try that again. This is not overbearing. 400 Conejos is very soft. So with this drink, it's a lot of people that don't like mezcal, try that and like, I actually like that.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm not the type of guy that typically would drink mezcal. I'm much more of a tequila guy, but I do think in the right cocktail, this being one of them, it definitely adds another layer to it that I think pairs very interesting with the citrusy flavors. It's almost like when you grill a lime or something like that. It just works out. So cool. I'm going to take a few more sips of this one, but what do you have for us next again?
Yeah, so next I'm going to do the Osaka Sour. So riff on a whiskey sour. We're not using traditional egg whites. We're using a foaming agent it's by a brand called Fee. It's a foam bitters. So we'll throw that in here. And then instead of bourbon, we're going to use Toki Japanese whiskey, the distillery originally in Osaka, so the nod to the name. And then just fresh lemon juice, a little bit of sugar. And I'm going to shake that all up together. And after I strain it, we're gonna do a little float of Cabernet, and then you get that nice fruity Cabernet flavor at the top, and then the nice whiskey comes through afterward.
And so how different, if you were to prepare this recipe in a traditional way, how different is this from a traditional version?
It's similar in that it's just whiskey, citrus, and sugar, and then the difference is the foaming agent. Instead of using the egg whites, we're using the vegan foam, and then the little float. So there's a drink called a New York Sour that it doesn't have a foaming agent, but they do float Cabernet on top of like whiskey and citrus and simple. So this is definitely a riff on a classic, but we're not straying too far, which was kind of like the idea in this concept, is a lot of the drinks to just be, simple, just very quality ingredients and straightforward with just slight variations that make it unique.
Well, and one of the things that I really like about the Elefante side, which I imagine carries over to here, it definitely sounds like it, is, Arizona has kind of an infamous feeling towards Californians who come over here, if you haven't picked up on it, which is, like the whole don't California Arizona, but in the best of ways, and I mean this totally as a compliment, Elefante kind of has that component to it where it's playful. I know it's not necessarily a beachy restaurant, but it has those natural tones to it that kind of, for me, evoke that, and definitely the lively atmosphere. I thought it was very playful while maintaining that elevated side of things.
And it is very beachy. I mean, the original location is just looking out over the beach. Of course, here we're not looking at a beach, but it is the same sort of an atmosphere. It's bright, it's white stucco. It just like makes you feel like you're in an almost tropical environment.
Well, and I guess too, when I think beachy, like I think of almost like coastal design in this day and age, where it's a lot of like just light woods and super bright and airy. That side has a lot of those woods and natural textures, but it definitely has like a sexiness and not opulence, but like pizzazz, if you will, I guess. I don't know if that's the perfect word for it, but I think you know what I'm trying to explain.
Yeah, definitely. It's also like sort of minimal, but then clean. So I just very lightly float that Cabernet on top. Then you get that nice striation of color with the foam.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
All right. There you go.
And so while I take a sip on this, tell me a little bit about how your methodology when forming cocktails has evolved over time from, batching stuff to where you are now. And was there a certain story you can kind of recall that really elevated your cocktail making?
I mean, honestly, it was the original Elefante. My background was never that intense of volume with the craft and the quality. The tasting kitchen where I worked prior was just a smaller venue. So we would make everything smaller batches. Every ingredient we would measure out individually, and we all became extremely fast bartenders because you have to keep up with 7 or 8 ingredients sometimes. But when we opened Elefante, there was just no way that was going to happen. Like the volume was just too much. So I had to kind of learn how to batch ingredients in a way that doesn't take away from quality. So my rule is always I'll batch liqueurs and mixers, alcoholic mixers, and then syrups, because they're more shelf stable. You can have a syrup and liqueur mixer that lasts for weeks, which there's no way we're gonna have anything sit more than a week at the most. So in doing that, I know the quality stays right. I don't like adding citrus to the batches because now you have an element that's not shelf stable that within 2 or 3 days is going to change completely in flavor. The alcohol will make it last a little bit longer, but nobody wants to be drinking multiple day old citrus. I don't want to be serving multiple day old citrus. So then that either leads to just having to pay very, very close attention, which there's not really enough time to do that, or to just be wasting and just decide we're going to throw away everything this day of the week no matter what and make it fresh no matter what, which I don't like to waste. I want to make sure we're being a little bit eco-conscious in what we're doing and also making sure that we're not just buying product and throwing it away. So that has really allowed us to be able to continue to make the volume happen but maintain quality.
Does the acidity of citrus throw off like other things I know like the citrus itself will degrade, but like when you squeeze a lime over like a freshly poured Modelo, for example, it immediately kills the foam. And I'm assuming, I don't know much about science, but I'm assuming that's the acidity in the lime. Do mixing certain things like that affect other ingredients in a way?
Not in a way that I've noticed, actually. So when I batch the liqueurs and the syrups like that, if I make that drink and do 7 steps and I make that drink with 3 steps because I put that all together, you would not be able to tell the difference at all.
Okay. Yeah, well, and so this drink, whiskey sour riff, essentially, or do you call it a straight up whiskey sour?
We call it the Osaka sour. Okay. Because that Japanese whiskey is from Osaka.
Well, and so the Suntory is a little bit more of a mellow whiskey compared to some other ones, right? This drink is, being that it is a sour, it's not one of those sours where all you get is sour, sour, sour. In fact, I find it a little bit less of that tart flavor than this first one over here, which I think is really nice, and I think with a more mellow whiskey that blends really well. Is there anything about this flavor profile that you guys were trying to design to be specifically unique? Or is it kind of along those lines of making it a little bit more mellow?
That was the idea about using the Japanese whiskey, because the Japanese whiskey is very subtle and it's just easy to sip even on its own. And then what's funny that you mentioned like the difference in the sour element, because lime is a lot more malic acid, so that's like a punch of sour that kind of peters off. So especially when you have that zest on top, like that drink is meant to be tart, right? While lemon juice is more citric acid, and citric acid is like a base mellow. So then when you add whiskey, which has the oak flavor, and it's the almost caramely and vanilla flavors, and then the little bit of sugar, it just melds and it makes a more even flavor. Where like the idea with this one is that you get like a citrus punch, where this is more about like having an overall smooth drink.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's totally my experience. And I love on this one versus this one, the juxtaposition of like the lime on top of that foam, stunningly beautiful, and it really kind of, the actual drink itself is green, but it's not bright green, whereas this kind of develops more color. The red wine float on top, I think they're a beautiful contrast, and I'm impressed by both of them. They almost feel like cousins or something like that, where they're related, but this one's a little bit of a different version of it. So impressed with this one as well. And remind me the last one that we had here.
Yeah, definitely. So the last one is called the Bianco Negroni. This is our riff on a Negroni. Traditionally, of course, is just gin, Campari, and sweet vermouth. So we take Salers Aperitif and then a vermouth called Sicomos. And I batch those together for volume because they're just alcoholic ingredients. But the the Salers Aperitif, we actually infuse with oregano and then bergamot.
Wow.
So it's already a very unique flavor. Salers is the element that's replacing the Campari, so it's the bitter element. And it has a very nice kind of herbaceous, subtle undertone. And then when you add the oregano and the bergamot, it just gives this very distinctly Italian kind of element to it.
Sure. Yeah, well, and that's really interesting because I can't think of a time that I've ever heard of oregano infused into a beverage before, and I love that tie-in with the Italian theme for sure.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was, again, just Shai and I having fun prior to opening this location and just playing with flavors. And she actually thought about the oregano as well. We bought some fresh oregano. That was fun. It was a collab between the two of us on that. I thought of the bergamot and she thought of the oregano. And we just started with using dried oregano because typically it's easier to use dried herbs because one, it doesn't go bad, and then the flavor is very consistent, where sometimes with fresh herbs, depending on the season, they might fluctuate a little bit.
Sure.
But the color was so intense from the dried oregano that
really?
it came out like brown almost, which no one wants to drink a brown watery looking drink. It's just unappealing visually,
Sure.
right? So then when we grabbed fresh oregano and the flavor popped in a totally different way, and it didn't do that at all. It kind of left almost no color. So the drink still looks almost clear. And yeah, that's always sort of the last piece, is like flavor obviously comes first and then presentation comes after that. We figure out how to make it look pretty. But the liquid, like the final color of the liquid is just so important. Like you were saying, like this is just like a soft, pretty green, and then this has the striation of like the red and then like the yellow underneath. And then this comes out just literally looking like a cup of water over a big ice cube.
Which is always so interesting to me because, they say you eat with your eyes first, or in this case, drink with your eyes first. And I mean, with the clear cube in there, it just looks like a glass of water. You have no idea it's anything else.
No idea.
I love a nice surprise like that.
Yeah, it's like you look at this and you might accidentally drink it and think that you were having a cup of water, and then take a sip and you're like, that is most definitely not a cup of water.
Well, and it's so interesting to me the way you kind of had to experiment with the infusion of the oregano, because like with cooking, it makes a difference, but with this, it's distilling, so to speak, all of the flavor into a glass. And I don't know, I feel like it's a lot easier to make something taste good that you're eating than what you're drinking. So are there any other unique infusions on your menu like that oregano?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a different vermouth called Delle Sirene, which is the Sirens. And the one that we use has a lot of herbal flavors, and then as well as a little hibiscus. And then we take fresh basil and then we blend that into that vermouth. and then strain it out, and then you end up with this soft basil undertone. And then we do sort of a margarita riff where it's a strawberry puree that we then juice fresh Fresno chilies. We combine the strawberry puree with the fresh Fresno chilies. We put it back in that centrifuge that I was talking about earlier where it spins everything really quickly and it separates all the solids. So then you get this like strawberry chili water. And then we use agave nectar, make that into a little syrup, and then fresh lime juice, and then the basil infused vermouth. So then it's got these subtle Italian undertones. You got the Italian vermouth and the basil, but then it's really a strawberry chili margarita, and it's absolutely delicious.
So circling back to this one, is a Negroni, is that from Italy originally?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because this definitely has those same characteristics where it's very herb forward. And this is my first time having a white Negroni. And when you get a normal Negroni, that color, you're almost like, if you don't know what a Negroni is, you're not expecting the punch that kind of comes with it. This is very, very mellow, and I love the freshness of this lime, or
the grapefruit peel, yeah.
The grapefruit peel on top, yeah, totally sets the stage for like kind of an herbaceous experience and almost that pithy flavor that kind of comes with a Negroni. But this is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
So do you have anything like this on any of your other menus?
Always.
Okay.
A Negroni riff is on just about every menu, because I personally, that's my favorite cocktail. If I go out, I want to drink a Negroni. Also, that's like the bartender's cocktail. So those kind of drinks they're for that clientele, for the cocktail aficionado and the bar people that come in. So it's typically in California, I'll do almost always a mezcal Negroni riff. I'm actually doing that here as well, but it's different vermouth and different bitter. And like you were talking about, there's so many vermouths and there's so many bitter ingredients. So it's really fun because the balance is almost always the same. It's about equal parts. Like this is just an ounce of gin, an ounce of the infused Sailor's aperitif, and an ounce of the vermouth. The traditional Negroni, the same thing, just an ounce of each of the three ingredients. So they're very simple seeming, but you can go so far with so many different elements that you add to it. So just about every menu has one, and I've probably made 15 or 16 different versions of a Negroni at this point that's been on different menus over the years.
And would you say this is your favorite so far, or just up there?
It's probably top 3. I think the one that we have on the menu currently in Elefante might be my favorite. It's sort of made it around the country at this point, but it's a vermouth called Cochi Rosa that's sort of got like cherry and leather and like cacao undertones. And then actually I'm using that Sailor's aperitif in that one. That's one of those ingredients that I personally love that sort of also comes around the country with me in different ways and different elements and different cocktails. It's bitter, vegetal, earthy, all at the same time, but none of it's overbearing. So when you add that to like citrus, sugar, and just about any type of alcohol, it just adds like 3 or 4 other flavors all of a sudden. And if you use a small amount of it, it's not overly bitter at all. It's not overly herbaceous at all. It's not anything too intense, but it now has all those little elements in it. And to me, a great cocktail, like if it's just sour and sweet, my palate's only experiencing sour and sweet. And I might want to take a sec before I take the next sip. But if I have a floral element, a bitter element, maybe a spicy element, and sour and sweet, and the smoke from the mezcal or whatever it is, every bit of my tongue is experiencing something. Every bit of my palate is experiencing something. So then when I put it down, I almost forgot what the first thing I experienced is, and I just want to take another sip. So that's sort of the idea. Yeah,
I mean, this one, Negronis for me are one of those where it's just kind of just kind of past that precipice of like a lot, you know what I mean? Whereas this one, it tastes so mellow compared to the Negronis I've had in the past, and I don't know exactly what it is about it that's that way, but like even that bittering component is not over the top. It really harmonizes with all of the other herbs in there. And that's definitely something that I would personally order, whereas a typical Negroni that I've had doesn't necessarily get me excited all the time, but that one's quite fantastic.
What I could stab at being the reason is sweet vermouth, which is the typical vermouth used, and it has a higher sugar content already than the vermouth I use here, for example. And then Campari, while it's extremely bitter, also has quite a high sugar content. So you have a lot more viscosity, and like you were talking about light, like this is light and easy to sip, where a Negroni is heavier on your tongue because there's a lot more sugar. And that's most likely what the experience that you're having is.
Well, and the way that this sits on your tongue is almost like you had fresh grapefruit, and then a couple minutes later you still have that pithiness to it, but it's not like over the top. And I say fresh grapefruit meaning the more fruit side of it, because you get a little bit of the actual pith, and it's definitely quite aggressive. But no, this is fantastic. And I totally agree that the mouthfeel is very unique from the typical Negronis that I've had before. Well, Julien, it was such a pleasure, man. Your knowledge and expertise is like so high up there that I've been just trying to keep up with you and make notes while also tracking everything along. But so impressed by these and the other cocktails that I've had. And yeah, definitely, if you're listening to this, make it into Bar Bambino so people can truly experience your cocktails in this, uniquely curated environment. But if you don't make it over here, every time I've been to Elefante, it's been fantastic. And I'm actually heading out to New York in a couple weeks, so I'm excited to try and make it into Ruby's and see what's going on over there.
Come check Ruby's out. I love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. It was such a pleasure.
It was really fun talking to you. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.